Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. In this episode, we examine the question of how to be your best self. We do that by examining mental health and well-being and how this applies to people's day-to-day lives. And for those people who have yet to see any of our previous podcasts, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter Wendy, who is an experienced, fully accredited CBT psychotherapist and EMDR therapist working in private practice, and has been involved in the field of mental health and well-being for well over 35 years now. So an absolute pleasure to have you here once again, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Ian, and a very absolute pleasure to have you here as well. And I'd like to introduce you. So, Ian, you are a Senior Accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and the founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. So a warm welcome there for you.
Thank
A very warm welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to the show. And in this session, we're going to be exploring a really interesting subject that we haven't spoken about before, which is writing for therapy, and how putting pen to paper can just help you to process an upsetting event, maybe feel more grounded, and just find ways of moving forward. And we'll start to learn a step-to-step way to write about a difficult experience, how to reframe in a way that it starts to hopefully hurt a little less, and how to use what we refer to as affirmations that can actually stick. And I understand, Wendy, that you'll also give some really top tips if you hit that writer's block or feel emotionally overwhelmed whilst writing as well. So, Wendy, why write, and what's the evidence that can help people as well?
Thank you, Ian, and a very good introduction. I really appreciate that. And also a very good question, Ian. Without going into details, there are decades of research on how expressing writing suggests that brief, structured sessions of writing about difficult experiences can bring small but very meaningful improvements in both a person's mental and physical health for so many people. An example of a typical way of writing, which could be called a protocol, like how to do it. One way would be to suggest that you write for about 15, maximum 20 minutes, ideally on 3 to 5 occasions, about something that's upsetting you, a stressful event. And the idea is that you write about it in great detail, about the facts about what happened, but also, more importantly, the feelings that you have if you've had a stressful event. So the research suggests that the benefits tend to happen on a gradual basis. So it's more of a long-term thing. And it's important to notice that you can feel more emotional after writing, with the improvements showing up late. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to manage that, because I think that's a really important detail, especially if you're doing this as like a self-help therapy as well. Now, there's lots of evidence to say that people who've had a significant trauma in their life can really benefit from writing therapy. And there's actually a whole approach called written exposure therapy, WET for short. And this, I'm not going to go into details today, but people want more information, they're very welcome to contact me. But it's basically, it involves 5 sessions, and it's considered a gold standard treatment to help people with post-traumatic stress disorder in clinical trials. And one of the benefits actually is the dropout rates are quite low. And I think one of the reasons why that is, it's maybe something that if people are guided how to do it in a certain way, they feel they have a certain length of control over it. They can do it at home, They can do it in their own environment, like a bit of a self-help therapy, but they also can be guided by an expert in this field as well. So you get a little bit of structure, a little bit of guide, it'd help, but also you can process your thoughts and feelings through the writing as well. Definitely writing is a very evidence-based to help for people who are suffering from some form of trauma.
It's a really good introduction to what's a really interesting subject, Wendy. So thank you very much for that. And I wonder if you can just explain the difference between what is writing for therapy and what is not.
A very good question, Ian, and I think a very important question as well. I would say writing for therapy is very important that it feels safe. It feels safe and it feels structured as well. So there's a process that you go through. But really, it's important to express how you feel about a situation, what was going on about a situation. And with all sort of trauma protocols, actually, whether it be in therapy or anything like that, when you write something down, you can help your brain to organize the memory, what happened. It's less chaotic. You can put it down in a structured way. And the other important thing is when you're writing it down, is that you can actually find some meaning in the process so that you feel as though you've gained something from the traumatic experience. However small, that's really important. And also by processing it, it helps it to go to bed in a way. It helps it to like the emotional upheaval calms down as well. So it should help with nightmares. Often what happens in trauma is that people have nightmares of associated with the trauma and they keep waking up as well. And so it can help to put those traumas to bed. So what it isn't about is worrying about grammar or creating a great work of art or actually forcing what I call forcing a silver lining. Sometimes you feel as though people have to always be positive and not have any negatives, but that also gets in the way of people fully expressing what they really need to say as well. So it's really important that you get the balance between expressing what has really gone on for you as well. And there is a process of actually looking for meaning behind it, which I'll go into, but also it's important to process the upsetting and the negative feelings as well. So it's about having that honesty with yourself, writing down the honesty of what actually happened. And also the context of what happened as well. Sometimes there's lots of research about putting into context when it happened, where were you, time of day. That's also an important thing. And also whether you had any choices. Sometimes you had no choice as well. And that's really important to mention that as well. I had no choice. Or maybe reflecting back, there's something else that perhaps you would have gained or learned from the experience as well. So I'm just going to give you, that's okay with you, just a couple of ideas about how best to write in a therapeutic way.
Please, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ideally, it works best if you have your own private space, a place where you're not interrupted. I know that might be difficult for a lot of people here, but maybe thinking about a place where you can go, where you're less likely to be interrupted would be a good thing. Make sure you don't have distractions, like with your phone pinging all the time. Try and switch your phone off so you don't get distracted. I think there's something about actually having some form of notebook. One of the benefits of having a notebook is you could be a journal type of thing. So you can write on a daily basis and it tells a story. But any piece of paper is fine. But I like the idea of having a notebook. Ideally, you want to ensure that you have some form of noticing the time. So that could be a timer if you have one, say maximum 20 minutes. Between 12 and 20 minutes is a recommended amount. Okay. And also prepare yourself for being upset as well. So you might need some tissues. That's always a good thing to have as well. But also think about what are you going to do afterwards? Have a soothing plan. So that could be going for a walk afterwards or phoning a friend or listen to music, anything that you think will self-soothe you afterwards. And that's a really important key to help the process. And also another thing that you can do before you write as well, you can practice some self-soothing exercises here. I'm just going to mention a few, if that's okay with you, Ian. So the first one is a breathing exercise, and it's very simply breathing through your nose, breathing in for 4, just count for 4, and then very slowly breathing out through your mouth for 6 as well. And do that nice and gently and slowly. Again, I would just say let your diaphragm or your stomach, sometimes it's called, relax as well. Just doing slow breathing in and out. It can, if you do it well, it can be very effective to calm yourself down. Another grounding technique that a lot of people know about, but I will just mention it just in case anybody hasn't heard about it. It's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. It's very simple. So you just look around while you're there and you notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Sometimes you can't always get the taste, and that's absolutely fine as well. Okay, just choose a grounding technique or a self-soothing technique that works for you as well. There's plenty on our websites, aren't there, Ian? You can actually go and look that up as well. Okay, so set your timer and then write continuously for the 12 to 20 minutes. Don't edit it, just writing continuously. But what you can actually have, and you can print this out if you want, is a structure. So the first thing to write about is what happened, when, where it happened, who was there. Okay, so just write the facts of the story. The next thing to write about is your emotions, what came up in the story, what comes up as you now write it, and also to really notice the emotions in your body. What do you notice in your body? A lot of people, we talk about this, so you have a sort of stomach churning, or a kind of, your heart might be racing. Sometimes people get sweaty palms, all kinds of things. It's really important to note the physical sensations as well. Then the next point is to do the meaning of this situation and the impact it's had on your life. So write down how it's affected you, okay? How it's affected your relationships, how it's affected your beliefs about yourself, how it's affected your relationships with others, or how you view the world as well. That's a really important process if you do that next. And then what I wish had happened. So often, sometimes there's terrible things and sadness and regrets in these situations. So it's really important just to give yourself, if you could freeze the frame, what did I need but didn't get? So often in abuse cases, the child, if it's an abused child, would have actually told someone, and the person hasn't done anything about it, or not listened, or not believed them. And that could be a very significant part of the trauma that this person might be processing when they're an adult. They're going through it, what happens as a child. And it's really important they recognize that at that point, they really needed someone to take control and to be protective of them and to really understand them. So that would be a great example of how, if only that person had listened to me, I would have got my needs met at that point. And then the last one is, what matters now? What values do I want to carry forward here? And when I values, it might be something like some sort of personal meaning to your life. It might be realizing that I was brave in that situation, that I went through a lot, but I'm resilient now, and I'm going to carry on being resilient in the future. I was just speaking to somebody earlier who'd been bullied a lot as a child. And we set up a system where this person wanted to have a friend, like a compassionate friend who speaks to her, okay, and gives her warmth and encouragement. And she said, actually, my younger self, because I developed resilience. Through that bullying, I developed resilience. And so if I did that, if I could go for that, I can go for everything. And I just thought that was a really good story, that even though she went through some terrible bullying when she was younger, she could still access that inner younger self to encourage her and support her to go on. So that's an example. It's really important to accept the normality of processing in therapy as well, writing therapy. You might feel very emotional, you might feel tearful, As I said earlier, just remind yourself that it might bring up more distress immediately after writing. This is quite common in all trauma approaches as well. But remind yourself that over time, over the days and the week, the brain starts to digest the experience and then you feel better afterwards.
That's really fascinating, Wendy. That's really interesting, and I'm sure will give lots of ideas to people. I guess as somebody that writes myself, the thought that goes through my head, or maybe this is just me, is what happens if you experience writer's block?
Oh, yes, that's very common. And in trauma, what you often have is fragmented memories. It's kept in I always just say, the oldest part of the brain as well, where it's very emotional. So you remember a lot of sort of feelings and vivid pictures as well. But it's often like fragmented. And this is why the writing can really help, because it starts to organize it and it helps your brain to process it. But there are things you can do to help if you suddenly feel overwhelmed. Again, quite normal. And one is to acknowledge it. So you can write, say, the hardest part of this is, or another good question to ask yourself is, what I keep avoiding is, because often what happens in trauma is people don't want to go there as well. So this is where the writing is quite good, because the idea is you do write about everything. Okay, so if you're noticing you're not writing, it could be just one of those trauma blocks. You want to avoid it. Okay, so remind yourself, what I keep avoiding is ... One of my favorites, because it's to do with compassion focused therapy, which I'm very fond of, is if I were kind to myself about this, I'd say ... Okay, so having that, just understanding this is hard, understanding trauma is difficult, understanding trauma is messy. It is not a clear cut step by step. It's a messy experience, and that's okay as well. Or another good one I like is to actually say to yourself, one small thing I can do next is, and again, I'm very, very encouraging of actually doing the small steps. Because sometimes if the step is too big, this is often what happens, I find in therapy, that it feels overwhelming, you can't do it, it's just too big. But just do a little small step, like a 1%. Yeah, I can do that. That's absolutely fine. And when you do it, you feel so much better. So one small thing next. The next thing is obviously the timer will then go off, and then you're meant to stop, even if it's in mid-sentence, and then just do a little bit of self-care. So you can stand up, roll your shoulders, remember the self-soothing exercise we talked about earlier, drink some water, and also just give yourself a little bit of encouragement. Maybe one thing you did well. I stayed with it. I told the truth. I finished the timer. Okay. And then do your soothing action. As I said before, for 2 or 3 minutes, go for a walk, go for a walk for longer than 2 or 3 minutes, or listen to some music, but self-soothe at the end.
A beautifully compassionate approach to what could be a really awful situation for some people. And this just feels a really lovely, gentle way for certain people to be able to approach it. So you said in that just doing a little bit, not to overwhelm ourselves, but just doing a little bit. I guess what I was wondering is how often is it recommended that we do this? Is this every day, every hour, every week? What's recommended?
And this is where the research comes in, because obviously they've done clinical trials on this and worked it out for us. We don't need to worry about it. So the research says, say, 3 to 5 times over 1 to 2 weeks. And that sounds about right to me, I think. So you don't want to be doing every day for 2 years. It's a certain thing where you have to give it a sort of an ending, don't you? But I think what's important to say is, obviously, if it's a very severe trauma, or you notice your distress it does become very high, or it doesn't go down, it is something you can work with a therapist as well. You can combine it. And most therapists will support and encourage you to do writing if that's what you want to do. Or you can actually go to a much more structured approach like the written exposure therapy, which sort of has more stricter guidelines around it. But yeah, so 3 to 5 times in 1 to 2 weeks is what's recommended.
Really interesting. So thank you again, Wendy. And In trauma-focused therapy, that whole process of reframing the event situation, that can be a really important part of the process. And I guess I'm wondering, is there an element of reframing through writing that you're doing, or how does that work?
Yes, a very good question, Ian, and another part of the process as well. So, what we say reframing is trying to see things in a different perspective, trying to get a more different view on things. A classic example is people who've been through trauma, they would perhaps blame themselves instead of, if only I knew, if only hindsight was a wonderful thing. And of course, they didn't know because they wouldn't be in that situation if they knew. Or perhaps, if a child's been abused, they feel guilty that they didn't stop it. And so a good way of reframing it is to remind the person that they were only a child and they had no control. And also that the abuser sometimes is a very controlling person and very coercive. So often the little child is coerced into the abuse that they don't want. So actually the reframe was, rather than thinking, I feel guilty for letting this happen to me, it was not my fault. I was a little child. I had no choice in the matter. That's an example of a reframe. You're seeing it from a different perspective.
Mm.
It's really important because you can feel very intense emotions. Obviously, you would in trauma as well. So actually getting this balanced perspective can really help with reducing some of the emotional intensity and help with coping what's happened to you as well. And there's some techniques, if it's okay with you, I like to go through
Yeah,
so that it
please.
makes more sense. Okay. So one technique you can do is it's facts versus story. So here it's a structured approach. You have 3 columns. So the first column is your facts. Okay. So just what happened, the facts. Okay. The second column is your story of what happened, your interpretation of the story, what it means about you. Okay. So the impact it's had on you. And then the third column is actually trying to get a more balanced, a more different perspective on the situation. How else can I see it differently as well? Like the example I just gave about it was my fault. The third column would be the reframe of that, saying, if you're a child, how can it be your fault? You don't know, you're just a child. Okay. Just to give an example of that. So column 1 would be a fact. My boyfriend didn't apply to my message for 24 hours. Okay. The story you tell yourself, he doesn't want me anymore, doesn't love or care about me. The balanced perspective might be, actually, he hasn't called back, but I don't know why he hasn't called back. Maybe he's got something else going on. I will just contact him again. If he doesn't get back to me, then I'll leave it. But I do actually have a chance of doing it. Okay. So the next way of doing it is called the ABC. And obviously it's very easy to remember because it's called ABC. This is very cognitive behavioral therapy, which I know you're very well aware of, Ian. Okay. So A stands for the activating event, what happened. B stands for the thought it triggered. And it's a distressing thought that it triggered. And C stands for consequences. Now, this could be how you feel about a situation or the behavior that actually happened after this. Okay. And then D stands for dispute. A classic example would be you see a friend across the road and you wave to the friend, oh, hi, Jenny, how are you? And the friend just walks straight on by and doesn't acknowledge you. Classic ABC sort of thing. So the activating event is a friend ignores you. The belief is, what have I done wrong? I've done something wrong. I've upset my friend. She doesn't like me anymore. The consequences are you feel hurt, upset, and you take her off your list. Okay, you don't contact her anymore. The disputing of that would be, maybe she had her earphones in. Maybe she didn't hear me. Maybe she was just in her own world and wasn't really looking my way or something like that. Maybe if she is upset with me, maybe it's a better thing I can do to actually contact her and find out what the problem is, because she is a very good friend and this is just a one-off. It's outside her normal behavior. And so I need to do something about that as well. So actually doing the ABC and adding a D, which is disputing those situations, is another way of reframing it. Another way of reframing is called meaning making. So you ask yourself the question, so you've written it all down, and then you ask yourself the question, what did this cost and what did it teach me? Okay. So this time you just got 2 columns. You've got a column on what it cost you, but then you've got a column of what you learned from the situation. So you're not saying, again, this sort of happy clappy silver lining thing, but there may be something you can take, maybe some wisdom or learning about life you can actually take, recognizing that perhaps you learned a bit, like I said about that girl earlier who recognized that her younger self was actually very resilient. Maybe actually recognizing that you learned some courage there, that you had boundaries. Again, a woman I'm working with child abuse, one of the benefits she said, one benefit, it wasn't much, but one benefit was she's very empathic as a person. She's got a good emotional intelligence and she's much more mature in her years because she can really understand what it's like to suffer and to be in situations where you don't want to be. So that's an example of a learning she got from her situation as well. So that's the next one. Number 4 is a self-compassionate perspective. And this is obviously what can really help here is imagine somebody writing who cares about you, a good friend or a nurturer in your life as well. Sometimes, like you say, if you feel shame and guilt, it's very hard to feel that self-compassion. But if you can imagine it from your best friend, what would they say about that? Most people can do that. And if they don't feel they've got any really good friends, you can use an imagined person. You can use somebody in the movie, like a movie star or your favorite character in a book as well, like Merlin or something like that, or a wizard, whoever it is you think is wise and compassionate. So that's what you can do. And this really helps if you've actually got a lot of shame in your story as well. If you really regret something or somebody was badly hurt and you just feel terrible about it, this is not your intention. This is not what you wanted. This was unintentional consequences. That's a really good thing to think about, is that you're suddenly thrown into this event and it was very distressing, but you didn't intend to be there. That's quite a good one, which is actually really quite kind. And then the final one for actually reframing is having a more values perspective. Back to values again. And this was a terrible experience. I have to accept it and move on. But what I've learned about myself is that the reason I'm so upset is that I care, that I'm a good person, because if I wasn't upset, then I wouldn't have any feelings about the situation. So I also take my responsibilities very seriously as well. So that's like a personal value you have. I care about people. I want to do the right thing. I'm responsible. Can you hear about those things you're saying about yourself, which is actually can translate then into behavior? So if you've got good values, okay, what can I do about this? So some people maybe they've been in a car accident, they might campaign to have better rules about cars and things like that, or they might tell everybody about their situation so people are more careful in cars, that they communicate more and tell people to really make sure that they don't make mistakes when they're driving. That's another example. There's a little bit more about how to reframe that process, Ian. Hope that helps.
Again, really interesting, Wendy, and really beginning to get a sense of how it's not just as simple as just writing a few notes down. There's a whole theory that sits behind this, and really beginning to get a sense of the structure and the processes that are going on as we're working through this. That's really interesting. You mentioned earlier about affirmation, and I was just wondering whether you could say a little bit about that and how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important to try and get them right, because sometimes people have these affirmations, but they don't ring true. They're not authentic to them. So whenever I encourage people to do affirmations, they have to find one which resonates with them. That's the most important thing. And they have to believe it. It has to be credible and also linked to a value as well. So one that doesn't work very well is everything is perfect, because life is not like that. Life is not perfect. And if you keep saying it to yourself, you're going to get unstuck at some point because something will happen which is not perfect. That's a bad example as well. But research on self-affirmations shows you that, again, remind yourself of your core values, can actually really help as well. So some examples is, I act with compassion would be one. I act with compassion. You can hear that's quite authentic, isn't it? And you're telling yourself that, and that's really important. Another one is have it with an action. So when I feel triggered, I take one slow breath before I speak. I think that's a really good one. I think we could all do with a bit more of that. Could
Absolutely.
just take
Let's just slow down a second.
yeah, before you speak it out, okay? Keep it believable. So aim for a 10 to 20% stretch on a fantasy. I'm the most cleverest person in the world. Again, it just doesn't, but maybe I'm good at my job, or I'm intelligent, I do my job well. That might be something a bit more realistic. Okay. So a little bit higher than what you're doing, but a bit more realistic. Okay. Another one is when then plans. This is an example of trauma symptom you can have. So when I notice a tight chest, I put my hand there and say, I'm safe enough right now. And I think that's a really good one as well, especially when you've got an action there. That can feel a very sort of reassuring, warm feeling, putting your hand over just there as well. So that's a really good one. Some more examples are, I can't change the past, but I can choose a kinder next step. Love it. Okay. My feelings are valid. My actions are my choice. Okay. So your feelings might be that you're very angry, you're upset, you're still mourning what happened to you as well. But what I can choose is my actions from now on. So an example could be, say you lost a loved one and you're still overcoming the grief and the trauma of that. All those feelings are absolutely understandable if you lost a loved one through trauma. But what I can do, I can take my, so you can either stay in and do nothing with your life, or you can take some actions and make your life more meaningful, and maybe do something which is a value-based action, like maybe helping in a charity or something like that. So you start to feel good about yourself. You feel as though you're contributing back to society rather than just withdrawing from society. That would be a good example. And another one I like is, because I value respect, I speak to myself respectfully. And again, it's that internal conversation we have with ourselves, isn't it? Which is sometimes very harsh, very self-critical, always telling ourselves that we're not good enough and everything like that. But what I can start doing is being kind to myself and treat myself with respect. I love that one. Okay. And then you write as many as you want, say 2 to 3, that they feel true. And then try writing them at the top of your page. Every new entry for about a week is what is actually recommended. So you can have a go at that.
That again, really interesting, Wendy. And as I listen to you, there's just a real sense of passion behind the approach as well. So I just get that sense that it's something that really has meaning for you, and something that you've clearly worked with clients and got really good benefits from it as well. And I guess with that comes the question of, how do we make it as effective as possible?
Yeah, and there's some tips here as well that I just can go through briefly, if that's okay with you. So the first thing is, the guide really is to always go for honesty. So if you notice that you're worrying about your grammar, or you're going back and people do this, and they go back and they correct my grammar as well, which is quite funny. But if you're over into the perfectionism, then just say stop. And if you're getting stuck in grammar and all that type of thing, just go to bullet points. If you can write by hand, I know so many people don't do this, but there's a lot of evidence to say writing by hand really helps to process what's going on in your brain as well. So the emotional processes, I know it can be quite tiring now. And again, you might be able to struggle to read all the words that you've written down, but that is recommended if you can do that as well. Keep the limit to 20 minutes as well. You can go come back. That's really important. Going back to our inner voices that we say to ourselves, just notice if you're saying something negative or critical to yourself. Just say that's a part of you. Say, here comes my inner critical voice. My inner critical voice is saying this. My judgy voice is saying that as well. So it can really help to identify the different parts of you that respond in certain ways. So hopefully that makes sense. Most people can identify with an inner critic voice. Okay. Sometimes if you're overwhelmed with the word I, you can use the third person. And that can just give you a little bit more distance as well. Just another little tip there. Okay. There's different ways of writing as well. And this is also quite interesting. So one of them is the letter I never sent. And this can be very deep and very profound, to write a letter to somebody that you wish you'd had sent as well. Regrets not saying the things you would have liked to have said as well. So obviously if a person's passed on, or you don't get the opportunity, you don't feel you've got recognition for the damage they did to you, it's a very good one to do as well. You can write a letter to the future you who's healed as well. Okay. So imagine fast forward into the future, say a year or 5 years, whatever you want to go, and write a letter to yourself about how well you're doing and how much you've overcome and everything like that. And then another one, if my best friend were here, and this is what I'd tell them as well. So it goes back to your best friend. What would they say in that situation? So there's a few more ways of doing it if you do get stuck.
And really fascinating, Wendy. So thank you so much for that. Are there other particular themes of problems that we might associate with this particular way of working? And if so, are there particular approaches that might be helpful to deal with those challenges?
Yes, I think the general rule is if you are feeling you're too overwhelmed, you're in bits after every writing thing as well, that maybe it is too much for you to do in this way. So you can shorten it basically. So ways you can shorten it is messy is fine. Again, whatever comes out, however messy it is, again, no judgment there as well. Write for shorter. So say write just for 6 minutes rather than 12 to 20 minutes as well, or just write short sentences. You can also do a voice memo, just say it out loud, say for 2 minutes, and then actually you can actually use nowadays, you can actually transcribe that. A computer will transcribe that to onto a written form if you want. So it's actually not quite so painful as well. And then again, mini rituals, light a candle, take 3 breaths, begin as well. The rituals are really quite important because you want to feel as though that emotional regulation when you're writing is important. So starting with emotional regulation, as I said before, the breathing techniques or the candle, and then finish with one as well. So there's a sense of containment when you're actually doing trauma work as well. So there's a couple of ideas there.
And I think when we're doing any sort of trauma work, it's common for us to feel a whole raft of different emotions, isn't it? And so I wonder if you can just say a tiny little bit about what if we feel overwhelmed by the emotion as we're going through this process?
Absolutely. And that's such an important question, I think, Ian, because this is the dilemma of doing things. The self-help writing therapy is really good. But as a therapist, it's really important that I encourage people to take good care of themselves when they're writing these things as well. So one thing is not to go fully into the feeling as well. Even if you just touch on the feeling, that could be enough that I felt sad, and don't go into any more depth, or stop there and take a breath and go and do some sort of self-soothing as well. So don't always feel like you have to go into the depth all the time as well. Using mindfulness techniques is really good. So another one we haven't mentioned is a sort of feeling grounded. I love this one. I know you know this one, Ian, as well. But when you just remind yourself you're here in the now. Okay. So you're sitting on the chair, your feet are firmly on the ground. You know where you are, you're in your place as well. So you don't get lost in the memory as well. You keep reminding yourself that you're right here, right now, and you're safe. So that's a really good one. You can just close in, you've got control. You can just close the notebook and just say to yourself, I will return to this on this sort of date as well, and keep that promise to yourself as well. So again, you've got control, you just close it as well. And then maybe, as I said to you before, if you feel you've got complex PTSD, what I mean by that is there's several traumas there and they are quite overwhelming, and you're noticing that you're overwhelmed, that might be a good time to get in touch with a therapist who sort of works in this way.
Yeah, and as you say, there's a point at which to reach out to a therapist, in particular a therapist that has good understanding of these things. So I guess the thought that was going through my mind is just, if you are doing these things, maybe you're doing these things on your own. What happens when you don't feel it's working quite as we hoped it was going to be working? What do we do then?
A very good question, Ian, and I totally agree with that. It's really important that we do monitor it and that we do feel it's working. Very good question. So the first thing I would do is actually look for what I would call micro shifts, so little changes. So that could be when you say a feeling, it doesn't feel quite so strong or overwhelming, or you can say it without bursting into tears, will be one example as well. Just noticing that you're feeling more at peace, noticing that perhaps you're believing the mantra or the affirmation a little bit more. Maybe you're noticing a difference in your behavior. You're going out a little bit more. You don't feel so hyper vigilant when you're going out as well. You're a bit more at peace. So actually notice these kind of changes. Sometimes, hopefully, your sleep will improve. Hopefully, you'll feel a little less irritable. And just give yourself the time just to notice these things. Maybe you actually start off by writing these things down, write down your symptoms and how often you're feeling them. And so you can perhaps measure them later on. That might be another thing to do. So you've got you can look back and think, oh my goodness me, I have changed because you've written it down and you can tell the difference. What's really important as well, self-care is very important. And if for any reason you feel overwhelmed, it's really important you actually go and seek help. You can go to the Samaritans, the number is 116 123. You can go to 111 helpline, go and see your GP, or go visit a crisis service as well. But don't be ashamed if you actually need to do that. That's really quite important. Okay. So just to summarize, this is a way to write about a difficult event. It's really important to reframe it with compassion. And this is not your fault. This is unintentional consequences.
Mm.
And use these affirmations, which are based in reality, truth, and which you can really relate to as well. They're authentic to you. And then if you want to give it a go, then you can always contact me and tell you how it went. I would love to hear from you. And I'm happy to guide you through anything that you do. So I offer you that as a service.
Thank you, Wendy. Again, really fascinating, and a really fascinating subject all round, actually. Some really good top tips in there that anyone wanting to try this approach can follow. So finally, Wendy, if people have listened to the podcast and are looking for professional help, what should they do next? What might be the next step for them?
They're very welcome to contact me on wendycastellino.com. Drop me a line and we can have a conversation to see what they want to do. And I'm quite into sort of combined therapies as well. So perhaps if a person can't afford private therapy, or we can do a little bit of a plan together where they can do a bit of writing themselves and I can perhaps guide or support them in that. Might be one way that people would like to move it forward.
Mm.
What about you, Ian? How can people get hold of you?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Shape Therapy and Counselling Services. We have a team of counsellors dotted around the country. We have a wide variety of people that work with trauma of a whole variety of different types. So if people want to get in touch with us, we have a website which is www.hopefulminds.co.uk. That's www.hopefulminds.co.uk. If people just want to have a completely free chat with us about ways to approach trauma or anything else, mental health or relationship related, they're very welcome to reach out for us. They can book in for a free consultation. There's absolutely no cost and there's absolutely no obligation. So people are very welcome to do that. They're also welcome just to have a little look around the website. There's lots of free information on there that can just support people if they're not quite ready to reach out as well. So it's really just for me to thank you, Wendy. It's been a fascinating podcast today, and a subject that we've never really touched on before. So thank you for bringing that into everybody's awareness. It's been a pleasure once again. And I hope it's been of interest to those people listening to us as well. So thank you to you, and thank you very much to everybody that's been listening in. We hope people can like or comment or follow and recommend us to other people that they feel might benefit from something that we cover in some of these podcasts as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody for listening. Thank you.